Hey, my friends, Mary Rose here, and I was so tickled to show up, as is my wont, like 2 minutes past the hour to welcome you all and see that there's just a whole bunch of comments already. I'm so glad to see so many of you coming. If you're watching on Facebook, there's this little instruction, which is not that difficult. You can do it. It's streamyard.com/Facebook. Chances are there's a link right above where you're watching this video right now. And that's just something that you can click so that your name will show up when you leave a comment, which I hope you will. Speaking of comments, let me open up the comment box. Look at this great community. Look at all you wonderful storytellers. Waving hi to Jay, Terry, Jaren. Always great to have you here. Look who's here. Aaron's here. Hey, Jean Ann is here. It's so nice to see you. Wonderful, wonderful. So, it's Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time. That is my customary time to go live and to hang out with all of you terrific geniuses, you wonderful committed storytellers, and talk about writing craft, story structure, and the mindset of the working writer. These are the three legs of our stool, if you will, the three topics that we seem to circle around and around and around again. And, like any artistic practice, this is a lifelong exploration. Hey, Nancy, didn't see you there. Hello, hello. It's great to see all of you here. Constanza's here too. Wonderful. What a nice group. Well, I guess you're all movie fans. And that must be why we have such a great turnout today, because our topic today is inspired. I'm a movie fan myself, and my topic today is inspired by the fact that here in the US, the Academy Awards will be announced, broadcast on Sunday. The Oscars, if you will, commonly known as the Oscars. And so this is like the annual celebration of cinema, of the movie business. It's a big deal in Hollywood. It's a big deal in the industry. It's a big deal to people who make movies, another narrative art form, much like writing fiction. And that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the things that really made me think about what to say about this, tension. Is it a tension? Is it a collaboration? Is it a mutual admiration society between movies and fiction? Is the fact that this year, I think this happens every year, if I'm not mistaken, but this year it got a lot of press, that there was a little bit of a kerfuffle about trying to decide what to put on the Oscar broadcast. And I don't have to tell you, but it's important when you put stuff on television, right? They care about how many people watch it. And so these award ceremonies tend to be decreasing in viewership. And so the people who produce them really want them to be appealing to the public. And so what does that mean? They try to think about what the, normal folks watching at home, not necessarily cinema buffs, are going to want to see. And what do they decide? They want to see celebrities. They want to see famous actors. They want it to be funny and entertaining. So chances are there'll be some comedy. Maybe there are comedians hosting. I think this year we've got some very funny people hosting the Oscars. And there's musical numbers. It's like, what does that have to do with movies so much? It's hard to say, but that's what they want to put up because it's super entertaining, right? But at the same time, the ceremony can't go on for 5 hours. And so they don't have time to give all the awards. It's an award ceremony, but they don't have time to give all the awards. You understand the problem here. Which awards did they decide to just give privately, to give before the Oscars even happen, and maybe not even talk about them too much? They call them the technical awards, the awards that have to do with stuff that does not include celebrity actors or the glamour, perhaps, of, telling some kind of story. So the screenwriter and director often are considered either celebrities or inextricably connected to the story that's being told. So screenwriting and directing are sort of considered okay to put on. The actors are the main thing because they're movie stars and everybody wants to see them. What are they wearing? It's all about the red carpet, all that stuff. But here's the thing, movie making, those of you who've had any experience with it, and I know some of you have, is a very technical process. So when you take away the technical awards, you're sort of taking out the stuff that has to do with actually making movies to a large extent. So for people in the business, this is really disappointing. It's always a source of much hand-wringing each year. what am I driving at? Good question. Fiction, which is what we're here to talk about week after week, writing fiction also has this stuff that's a bit glamorous and up front. And most of us think of it as like the characters and the plot, the characters and the story. Like that's what's up front. Those are the celebrity categories. But it also has technical categories, the kinds of things that don't seem as splashy, perhaps, at first glance, if you're not an insider with a certain amount of expertise. But these technical categories of fiction, if you will, are where the movie's made. Like that's actually how that's how we make the donuts, as that old commercial used to say. It's the technical categories that make all the difference. And so I wanted to talk today a little bit about how movies deliver the significant entertainment value that they deliver. Which are the technical categories of movies, and how do we interpret these technical categories in our fiction writing? Do we have skills as writers? Do we have techniques as writers that allow us to achieve the same dazzling impact that movie makers do? Now, I'm going to argue yes. And before I argue yes, I want to take us on a little journey of context, because I do feel, out of writerly pride, obligated to emphasize that we're not taking this stuff from the movies. We're not borrowing techniques from the movies. The movies borrowed it from fiction. So that's what we were in for today. I know you're all movie fans. Some of you may have opinions about what movie should win this year. You can feel free to debate the Oscars in the comments, but also think about what I'm saying. And if you've got some questions about how we can make our writing, I almost hate to say it, more cinematic, I would love to hear them. This is a live stream. Your comments really help shape and guide the discussion. So I haven't introduced myself, and let me just pop in and do that for a second in case anyone here is new to the live stream. Maybe someone's watching on the replay, new to the live stream. My name is Mary Rose Wood. I am best known as a novelist and best known as a writer of middle grade fiction. And I'm also the founder of pathofthestoryteller.com, which is my own platform where I train and mentor writers like the gorgeous people who are here in the comments today, who really want to level up their writing skills so that they can create fiction that is reader ready, that is not just something that it feels good for them to write, although I want it to feel good for you to write, but something that really works. You know, how do we get out of the limitations of our own ear, our own, hodgepodge of training that may or may not be giving us all the tools we need, and really understand how fiction works for the reader and how we can write stuff that is at that level, professional level, publishable level, whatever phrase you want to use for it. What I mean by it is that it's really going to work for the reader. If you can write stuff that works for the reader, you get to write your ticket. That's the way this game is played, my friend. So that's what we're here to do. I would love for you to get on the Path of the Storyteller mailing list, by the way. I'm going to put that up just for a second. It's pathofthestoryteller.com. You can head over there now, later, anytime you like, and put your name on the mailing list. I got a new program coming up, a new course that I think is going to be really interesting to you all. Going to be announced soon, and the people on the mailing list are going to know about it first. Okay. Public service announcement done. Let's give some context to this discussion of fiction and movies, shall we? First of all, storytelling arts are ancient. We know this. People have been telling stories as long as there have been people. We can make an argument that, we can go back to cave paintings from 10,000 years ago and say, oh, look, they're telling a story. It's like a graphic novel. It kind of is. It's telling a story through images. There's stuff happening, right? There's figures, there's conflict, there seems to be, engaged in action. So anything having to do with the narrative arts is something that is kind of intrinsically part of being human. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And there's a lot of evidence that may be the case. But the forms of storytelling have a lineage. And if we go way back, maybe not as far back as the cave paintings, but if we go way back, what we start to find is that the original forms of storytelling were oral traditions, people telling stories. And some of the remnants of this that we have in that have come down to us are epic poetry. You can go and find things like the works of Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Gilgamesh. These are stories that were told aloud. And so they have a kind of a rhyming structure. They have a verbal structure, which is a tremendous asset when trying to remember something, right? If you want to memorize something and it's got a little bit of rhyme and it's got a structure and a rhythm, that becomes a mnemonic device that helps you tell the story over and over again. So back in the murky world of oral tradition, fables, and stuff start to coalesce. Now we're starting to talk about literature, right? That comes down to us into epic poetry. And then we also have drama. We have live performance. And this, again, is like one of the ancient forms of literature, of stuff that's written down that we can still look at and say, oh, interesting. Thousands of years ago, they were telling stories about these kinds of people with these kinds of problems. But it was theater. It was performed, depending on where you look at in the history of the development of theater, it's performed by a chorus, then a chorus with some actors in front. So it starts out almost like as a recitation, as a ritual feeling, but then all of a sudden there are people in front of the chorus and they're taking on the role of characters. And then those characters are interacting with each other. Hello, all of a sudden we have dialogue. The stories become quite structured and complicated. Many of them draw from old myths. So it's all lineage. It's all development, right? And so we have that theatrical tradition, then moving into the Roman theater tradition, which sort of borrows and reinvents the Greek Roman theater tradition. And then we get to the Middle Ages. And now we start to have like romance tales, the chivalric tales, the tales of the knights. These are almost like little periodical stories. These become a kind of a precursor to modern fiction. We also continue to have epic poetry. Dante's Inferno is a terrific story told in a poetic meter. During this time also, you've got stuff that looks very much like a novel happening in Japan and China. So you see this movement toward written fiction that's not drama is starting to happen. There's still lots of drama during the Middle Ages. There are these morality plays. There's puppet theater going on. There's all kinds of stuff going on. People will always be very innovative in how they tell stories. But this thing that we call the novel is still evolving. We see these examples in Japan and China. And then in Europe, we get to like the very early 17th century. And all of a sudden there's Don Quixote. And this is considered like the first modern novel in the Western literary tradition. So there's centuries of storytelling before it, but we're separating the novel away from this tradition of performance. And that's what I want you to track a little bit with me, because I'm going to do the reverse now, right? Because we're going to sort of lead back into this convergence of storytelling through cinema and the novel. So once you have Don Quixote, you're in the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, fiction in the West goes crazy. We've all read novels written in these centuries, and they're great. Some of our favorite fiction might be, the sort of classic novels of the era. And then where do movies come out of this? Well, photography is not really fully developed into the 19th century. And they're playing with photography in a stop motion way so that you could take a sequence of photographs and create the illusion of movement. Anybody who's ever drawn a sequence of pictures at the bottom of a notebook and then gone, right, to see them move, this is exactly what they were doing. And then all of this, the technology of this, here we are back at the technical categories, it starts to really blossom in the 20th century. So after a couple of thousands of years of storytelling, in the 20th century, we get to movies. So that's an important context. This is a very new form that's sitting on top of a lot of different traditions. And these traditions include performance, dance, music, puppetry, narrative, poetry, and also the more developed tales of novels, which are also relatively new. So movies and novels are sort of the newcomers to this, but movies are like brand new, like in the big historical timeline, they're babies. They're very new, rapidly evolved, of course, during the 20th century, and now here we are in the 21st. So movies do a kind of a fascinating job, right, of drawing together all these different media, all these different expressive forms into a single experience for the viewer. And this is why there are so many different awards to give out on Sunday. If you were to give an award, of course, there are many awards for novelists as well, you're giving an award to the writer for the book. It's a kind of a solitary accomplishment, even though authors will always be thanking their editors and the people who inspire them and the folks that brought them coffee, all the rest of it. That's totally fine. But when you give a prize for a novel, you give it to the writer in the book. When you give a prize for a movie, you've got to give it to 30 different people, because that's how many creative disciplines, and I'm just pulling that number 30 out of the air. It may be more than that. There are so many different artistic disciplines that have to collaborate, that are involved with making a film, which is why Sunday's prioritization, their hierarchy of which awards get shown and which is not, is so galling to people in the business. So with that context in mind, I want to talk about some of these not celebrity driven, right? Not the stars, and maybe not the story itself, but what else is going on, these technical categories? Because my argument today is that as fiction writers, we too have the ability to express ourselves in all of these other ways. And we have to ask ourselves if we're taking advantage of them for full effect. I wanted to say, Anne, really love this comment, by the way. Anne says opera too, very much so. As you all know, I love the theater and have a background personally in musical theater. Anne is completely right. One of the reasons that those of us who really love opera and musical theater feel that way is because it has that same richness. There are so many different forms of artistic expression that collaborate to create a unified experience. Definitely a great point to make, Anne. I'm so glad you said that. All right, let's talk about these technical categories of movie making. The first word I want to throw out at you is one that I'm going to say it, but then if I ask you what exactly does it mean, unless you're in the business, you might say, I'm not entirely sure. And that word is cinematography. Isn't it all cinema? Well, what exactly does cinematography mean? How is that different than like directing or whatever, So let me just give you a very basic kind of layman's definition. So cinematography basically describes what is done with the camera. And a lot of things are done with the camera in making movies, right? So the camera is set up in a certain way and lit in a certain way, right? So there may be a type of lens on the camera, filters on the camera, particular lighting that works with the way the camera is set up. And those choices affect how it looks. And I guess the simplest way that I can explain this is you've all got phones that can take really good pictures, right? But you also know that once you take a picture, it gives you the option of changing the lighting, changing the focus, blurring this out, zooming in, zooming back. Like you can manipulate the picture according to a lot of different creative choices. This is cinematography. It includes also the movement of the camera and the angle of the camera. So right now I'm talking to you and I'm sitting directly in front of the camera, and we're sitting at a length where, you're sort of getting the upper half of my upper body. It's not a close up. I'm not gazing into your eyes, deeply so that you can see my pupils dilating, but it's kind of a close to a medium shot. Now, this is part of the, as you can see, so many choices fall under the heading of cinematography, and the movies that you watch, these choices are in every frame. There isn't a second of the film that's not in a, to a large part, like, decided by the cinematography. So you can say it's a technical field. It's, I mean, there's a lot of technology involved, right? There's a lot of gear involved. But talk about artistic expression. A movie with one cinematographer, which you could say in an alternate universe, what if a different cinematographer did it? It would be a completely different film. It would be just as different as if you had a different set of stars. So that's what we mean by cinematography. What's in the frame? What does it look like? How is it lit? How does the camera move? From what angle are we seeing the action? Now, at first glance, that might not seem like something that we can replicate in fiction, but I'm going to argue that that's not the case. Let me go over some of these other technical categories, and then we're going to see what we can do to bring that level of expressiveness into our fiction writing. Another one is production design, which basically means what everything that is shot that ends up in the frame looks like. Now, any movie is, it could be shot on location. You could just go out with a movie camera and put some actors in front of a building and just shoot it. But that's not how it works in practice, because if we want the movie to tell the story we want it to tell, we want it to look the way we want to look, we have to choose where we shoot the film, and we have to choose, in a sense, what every object in the shot is, what it looks like. A film that's set in the past, for example, the amount of work and care that is taken to replicate the look of the past, to make sure that new things don't sneak in by accident. But it's not even just about accuracy. It's expressive. It's almost like creating a, a painting, a living three-dimensional painting that is designed to be the backdrop. It's like designing the set for a play. It's designed to create the world of the storytelling. And so every item in it is chosen. It's not accidental. So that could, production design. Here's a big one, huge one, in my opinion. Maybe the thing that means most to me is the music. So a movie has a score, right? And these scores, again, are not just like, what's on my Spotify playlist today? I'll attach it to my movie and I'll just send it out to be considered for an award. No, no, no. I mean, there are film composers. This is their life's work. And they collaborate so closely with the director and the cinematographer and the whole apparatus of storytelling, because the music of a film is of enormous impact. If you watch a film without, or any clip, any video clip without music, it's one experience. If you watch that same video clip with music, it's a different experience. If you change the music, it is a completely different experience. This is such a fun exercise to do. You can take a clip and you can put sad music to it and it becomes a tragic scene. You could put, circus music to it and it becomes a farcical scene. The music changes everything about how we experience what we're seeing. So the musical score is an incredibly expressive part of cinema. And here's something else that I want to mention about what happens in cinema that's different than what happens in fiction, is that in a movie, there's actors. Even if it's animated, there's voice actors typically, right? And that's something that we don't have at our beck and call when we're writing fiction. And so this too, in a sense, is something that movies do that we might want to investigate a little bit more, how we can bring that juice into our fiction writing. Okay. So let's go back now. I've mentioned cinematography, I mentioned productions design, and I mentioned music. I'm sure there's a ton more, but that's a nice selection of things for us to explore today. Cinematography in particular is a complicated one. How do we handle the cinematography of our novels? I want you to think about the power of language to create an experience for your reader. Now, those of you who've taken my Path of the Storyteller program in the past or who are taking it now know that I'm a big fan of neuroscience. And one of the things that we bear in mind when we're writing fiction is that the fruits of our labor as fiction writers are not what's on the page. The fruits of our labors happen inside the brain of our reader. What's on the page is ink. That's not we're not ink makers, we're storytellers. And the story comes to life where? In the brain of the reader. So that is our cinemascope, that is our IMAX screen. That's where it's all going to happen. And how do we create that experience? We create it with words, with language. That's what we've got to do the jobs of all of these people, the cinematographers, the directors, the screenwriters, the actors, the production designers, the composers. We've got words. But what can we do with words? Can we choose what to put in the frame, as a cinematographer does? Can we choose how it's lit? Can we choose from which angle we present it? Can we decide how close it is to our reader? The answer to all of those questions is absolutely yes, we can. The only limitation is that many writers don't bother to do it. So let's dig into this a little bit. If I tell you that I want you to be the cinematographer of the scene that you're writing, and I want you to, shoot it through a lens that brings what's in the right-hand corner of the frame into sharp focus and keeps everything else kind of blurred and murky. Maybe there's a dramatic shaft of light. I'm trying to create a mood, right? Like I'm just instructing you to create a mood, to select where the reader's attention is going to be. And can we do that with language? We can, because our words are, in a sense, a kind of guided hypnosis for our reader. And what we give them words to, the words that we give them to create this internal landscape out of, that's what they're going to create. They're not in the job of inventing stuff that we don't give them the words for. And if our words are accurate and presented well, they will come to life in the reader's brain and create exactly the mood and imagery and feeling that we want to create. So one of the things that we have to start to pay attention to as writers are we actually describing the generic version of what we're imagining? Have we sent our characters into a coffee shop? My coffee shop, if I'm your reader, and the reader next to me is coffee shop, they might be two different coffee shops. Have we done the extra work of designing our coffee shop, of creating the production design of that coffee shop? Have we decided what kind of place it is, what kind of dishes are on the table, what do the other customers look like, what's the lighting look like, what's the weather outside, what is seen and what is not seen? We get to choose all of that by the choice of what we offer our reader. What words do we use? What descriptions do we give them? One of the things that's really important to remember, of course, is that if we use language that feels familiar, if it's even a little bit close to being a cliche, it won't work for the reader's brain as cinematography. It won't work as production design. It will just lay there as language. It's not going to fly off the page and contribute to this vivid dream, this fictional dream. That's a phrase of John Gardner's. It doesn't contribute to this fictional dream that's going on in the reader's head. And, a fictional dream that's going on in the reader's head feels a little bit like a movie, right? That is, in fact, what we're supposed to be creating. And so if we don't bother to fully do the work, to fully imagine how we want to present the setting to the reader, it's just going to default to generic, and it's going to stay language. It's going to stay ink. It's not going to actually kick into this experience. Now, what can we do in terms of our production design and cinematography that the filmmakers cannot do? We can put fragrances, scents, aromas in. We can create sensory experiences on the skin. We can alter the temperature. So you see, we as writers have access to sensory detail that even the best movie makers don't. Although there was a time when smell-o-vision, I believe, was being experimented with in the movie theaters, that this was going to be something that they were going to add to the experience. There's going to be fragrances. But language is an incredible tool. If we describe sensory information vividly, it will create in the reader's brain not an experience of language, but an experience of smell, an experience of touch, right? It's going to create a sensory experience, because guess what? That's where all our sensory experience happens, in the brain. So think about all of that stuff. One of the things that I want to emphasize as well before I move on to our next technical category is this idea of distance as well. This is one of the most common hallmarks to me of a writer who does not yet understand how much power they have. They're a bit undertrained. They're not doing all that they can do with language to create an incredible experience for their readers. It's as if they're making a movie and they're waiting for the cinematographer to show up to add that level of detail. But guess what? When you're a novelist, you're doing all the tasks. That's why you get all the awards, right? They don't have to divide it up into 30. You'll get it all, but it means that you have to do all these jobs. And distance is one of those things that can really change the quality of your writing once you start to think about it. And what I mean by distance is, let's go back to the movies, cinematographer's job. They might make a choice to shoot something with the actors visible the way I'm visible to you right now. They might choose to shoot the action of a particular scene from way, way back, so that the actors are seen just as little people. Maybe we can hear them, but they're little. We get their whole bodies in the shot, maybe at a distance. And so they're a bit dwarfed by the setting. That would be called a long shot. Or if it's a dramatic moment, a love scene, stuff's really happening, they might zoom in on the stars so that we get pretty much their whole faces in on the screen. And that's called a close-up. So you've all seen movies. You know what I mean when I say it's a close-up. It's a long shot. It's something in the middle, right? This is something that filmmakers do with tremendous intention. They don't randomly decide, I don't know, close-up, long shot, doesn't matter. Not at all. They are telling the story, and so they think about what tells the story best, and that's the shot they use. Guess what, novelists? You need to do the same thing. Now, you may ask, how do I change the distance? Like, the book is here and the reader's here. Isn't that the same? But I'm not talking about the distance of the book from the reader. I'm talking about the distance of the reader from the story. You can describe a scene. Let's say I'll randomly make something up. Somebody's, trying to pick a lock, and it's super important, right? Maybe they're trying to get, the clock is ticking. It's a dramatic moment of storytelling, and they're trying to pick a lock. And so you have a character who's got a normal sized human figure in a normal sized human setting. But the stuff that's happening, that's of dynamic importance, is happening at their fingertips. Now, where are you going to point your camera? Are you going to point your camera at the ceiling? Are you going to point it at their face, perhaps, or some of it? Are you going to keep the camera 15 feet away so that we get the full picture, or are you going to be conscientious about where the action of the story is? Yes, maybe moving in close on the character's face so that we can be one with their anxiety and the urgency of the moment. But don't you think you're going to want some shots of those hands furiously trying to pick the lock before whatever, before the bad guys come or before the thing blows up, whatever the urgency is? So you see what I'm saying? The distance from which we tell the story is completely dependent upon where the storytelling is. And in fiction, you can choose to describe what is being seen from all of those angles. You can focus on the character's experience. You can focus on their hands. How do you focus on their hands? By describing their hands. That's what you put into words. You describe, the experience of the fingertips. You describe maybe what it looks like. I mean, you can find ways to focus your language on that level of closeness. Once you get in the habit of thinking about distance and what image, in a sense, you want to put in your reader's mind, you are going to love being the cinematographer and production designer of your own book. You're going to love it, but you're also going to recognize that it's a tremendous amount of work. And you're going to wish that maybe there was someone else to do it for you. But there isn't. It's your job. All right. So I'm going to just quickly check to see if anyone's got questions, any particular questions about this idea of distance. Darren has a question. My favorite camera technique is the dolly zoom. What would be the literary equivalent? So I'm not a filmmaker, Darren, but I'm assuming that you mean by a dolly zoom is that you've got a kind of a long shot that's moving, right? It's so that's what the literary equivalent is to describe just that, is to be back at a distance from the action and to depict the movement by what is described. It's this seems counterintuitive, right? But if you can use words to describe anything you want. You really can. I mean, language is magical in that way. And I challenge you to try to write one. I mean, that would be a really valuable exercise, to think about a moment in the story that you're telling where, if you were making a movie, that's exactly what you would do. You would put a camera like on a crane with wheels and you get this long shot and it would be moving. How can you describe that kind of sort of epic feeling, moving shot in language? Challenge yourself to do it. I would love to hear how it comes out. Very good. Okay, so let me move on now, because we talked about this kind of production design and cinematography involves tremendous amount of attention to description. What do you choose to describe? From what distance do you choose to describe it? I want to now move on to this idea of a musical score in film. Surely, you say to me, Mary Rose, surely we can use words to describe. Writing description is fun. It's great to be vivid. I understand using sensory detail will bring stuff to life in the reader's brain. That's all good. Maybe I'm going to think more about distance now and how I move the camera around. What do I center in the frame? Anything you don't mention is not in the frame also, right? And so that affects your choices about what to leave out. Anything you choose to describe ends up in the frame. Now, don't clutter the frame. Just put in it what you want the reader to focus on. This is a great piece of advice for those of you that tend to put everything in there and say, oh, I'm an overwriter, but I don't know what to cut. It's not just about length. It's about what you've put in the frame that's not important. Think about where the storytelling is. Only put stuff in the frame that supports the storytelling. So that's another thing that you can start to do in terms of thinking like a cinematographer. Back to music. There is so much emotion stirred up by music. We all know this. If we hear the song that was the theme of the prom, the year we graduated high school. We just feel so much stuff. There's songs that make us feel like missing old loves. There's songs that make us feel like, getting in the car and driving around with the top down with our high school buddies. I mean, music of all kinds just evokes our emotions. It's so powerful. And this is why it's such an important part of movie making. But surely you say to me, we can't do that in our writing. What can we do? Send out like a playlist? Well, some authors do this, right? They'll say, here's the playlist that goes with this book, which I think is cute. Nobody gets hurt doing that. But it begs the question of, we are novelists, we work with words. How do we put music in the words? How do we use language to create that same level of emotional expressiveness that adding a musical score to a film does? Can we do it? The answer is yes, of course we can do it. Of course we can do it. Anybody who likes poetry, writes poetry, reads poetry, studies poetry, knows that language is, in a sense, above all, a rhythmic and auditory experience. Our first experiences of language, when we're acquiring language, are auditory. People speak to us in there is a kind of an intuitive sing-song musicality to the way we speak to babies and young children. When people read, and there is, again, some interesting neuroscience about this. When people read, there is an experience of having the book speaking to you in your head. It has this auditory quality that is just part of reading. Even if we're reading silently to ourselves, it's like there's this tiny, like, ghostly voice in our head reading the book to us. Language is auditory. It's never just words on the page. It's always got this hint of auditory information about it. And so our use of language is also driven by the auditory quality of the language. And again, this may seem obvious once I point it out, but it's the kind of thing that fiction writers, not poets, but writers of fiction, sometimes don't bother to think about. And they will write sentences that have tongue twister combinations of words. They'll write sentences that in which each sentence follows the same rhythmic pattern again and again and again and again, like for pages. They never mix up the rhythm. They don't use rhythm to express themselves. When you work with the auditory quality of language the way a poet does in fiction, you start to see countless opportunities to compose the score to your storytelling. You can speed things up. You can slow things down. You can smack a cymbal or a drum beat for emphasis simply by working consciously with the lengths of your sentences, where your paragraph breaks are, what kind of words you use. Are you using a lot of 2 and 3 syllable words so the whole thing starts to have this doodly 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 tune? Or do you break them up frequently with sharp, short, 1 syllable Anglo-Saxon words? It's a completely different experience, right? Even on the page, the tune of the language will be heard by your reader. I can't emphasize this enough. This is a really transformative practice to get into in your fiction writing. Look at the tune of the words on the page. Look at how you're using word choice and rhythm to write a score for your book. If it is a romantic scene, let your sentences take on the rhythm of a romantic ballad. Like, put it in there. If it's a scene of sharp, abrupt, breathless action, high stakes, characters on the run, you can create sentences that replicate that experience. One of the things then is a dead giveaway to me if I'm reading a student manuscript, and I can see right away that they never think about this, is if they have a scene of physical exertion, if they've got a scene that is super high stakes, lots of action, and perhaps their main character in some sort of jeopardy, and the rhythm of the language never changes. It simply just keeps telling the whole thing as if it were that nothing is happening. So the rhythm of the language of the main character sitting in her bed thinking about what a nice day she had, and the rhythm of the language of their main character, running from people who are trying to kill her, does never changes. They're stuck in the quote unquote way they write, which they may mistakenly think is their voice. That's not their voice. It's a limitation of writing craft that is actually concealing, dampening the amount of expressive power their writing could potentially have. So I want you to think about whether you use the auditory quality of language on purpose to create the score to your book. It is so powerful. Now, there's one other thing. I mentioned before that actors are something that we may sometimes wish. We may wish for actors to come make our dialogue sound hilarious or scintillating or moving, right? We may hope that in the hands and the talents of a really expressive actor, that what we put on the page is just going to somehow come to life. And the truth is, it's our job to make it come to life. And in that sense, we also, in addition to writing the musical score, doing the cinematography, designing the set, all that stuff we've already talked about, we also have to play all the parts. We have to get our inner Meryl Streep on, and we have to imagine ourselves in the emotional and physical lives of our characters just the way we would if we were playing the role in a movie. And now for some writers, this is hard. For some writers, it's actually part of the fun of creating, is that sense of getting lost in the story, of being the character. That can, it depends on how you get into stories, what your process is. But for some writers, this can be really hard. And you'll notice in the work of these writers that things can happen in the story that would, for most of us, create a very big emotional reaction. And the characters don't have a big emotional reaction. They're so restrained that they just underreact. They just underreact to what's going on, or something disturbing will happen in one scene, and then the next scene comes along and the character seems unchanged. It's like they just forgot that they've been through this traumatic experience, or they saw something terrible. It evaporates. The emotional truth of it is no longer alive in the body, right? Because when we have emotional experiences, it's not abstract. It affects we feel it in our bodies. It takes over our nervous system. And a really, really fine actor knows how to let their body get caught up in the feelings. They're not just saying the lines. They take it into themselves. And obviously, when an actor is brilliant and gifted, you can see this, and it's magical. It's magical. How do we as writers do that? Our characters express themselves in dialogue. They express themselves in what they do, right? The actions that they take, how they proceed through the story. But this brings us, of course, to something that we as novelists can do that a film can try to, but it really never can quite succeed, which is that we can share with our readers the actual inner life of our characters. And this is where fiction really becomes magical, right? It is truly a mind meld. Now, you might say some movies use voiceover. Sometimes movies will have the main character's voice telling the story over the imagery, or some will have the main character turn directly to the camera. One sees this on television quite a bit, actually, this direct address to the camera, and tells us exactly what's going on. This, of course, like all of these techniques, derives from that long tradition of theatrical storytelling that I mentioned earlier. A soliloquy is no more than an actor sort of breaking out of the action of the play and directly speaking to the audience and sharing what they think about what's going on. But that's not, to me, quite the same as letting the audience in to the consciousness of the character. It's still the character, in a sense, performing, narrating, interpreting for us. Fiction allows something that's like the level deeper than that. It allows the reader to really be inside the character's experience, not just what they choose to tell us about their experience, but to be in their experience, to think with them, to feel with them, to be in their bodies, to feel the physical sensations. We can do all of this with language. We create this remarkable opportunity for profound empathy, to really get inside the experience of another human being, even if that human being is fictional. So this is one of the things that we can really feel very grateful for as novelists. The last thing that I wanted to say is, again, something that I think we should feel really good about as novelists, which is that the experience that we give our readers is internal as well. Now, traditionally, movie going has the advantage I wouldn't say advantage, it's a difference. It has this different quality of being something that could be communal, that you could go to see a movie and there'll be hundreds of other people there seeing a movie. And so it's like theater in that sense. It's a shared communal experience. Of course, in modern times, that's often not the case. And people are just as likely to see a movie sitting at home by themselves as they are to see it in a movie theater. So it'll be interesting to keep watching how this changes movie making, because that experience of seeing movies on a big screen was always part of the appeals, what made movies so thrilling. The other thing that movies have that is also changing is that if you would go see a movie in a movie theater, the filmmakers decide the pace of the whole experience. You're going to start at the beginning. You're going to sit there. The story will unspool at whatever pace it chooses until you get to the end. And that's the experience. We know that our readers don't read books that way. They pick them up and they might read them all in a sitting. Some readers love to do that, but more often they're going to put it down, pick it up, read at whatever pace they read. So what we have as novelists is in a sense, a kind of an added obligation to make sure that our reader comes back, right? That they come back. And so we want to use all the tools at our disposal as storytellers to make sure that they come back. And what's going to bring them back? You can think for yourself what will make you continue to pick up a book, to make sure that you finish it. Compelling characters, a high stakes plot, but also, and perhaps above all, the skillful use of all of these techniques that we're talking about that create this vivid lived experience for the reader that is not happening outside of them on a screen, but is actually happening where? Inside their own consciousness. Movies can try, but they can never do that. This is what makes fiction magical. A movie can't do that. A movie's out there on the screen, and it's got to use all of this incredible technique, and we all love it, to give us a vivid experience, but it doesn't do what fiction can do, which is to use language to put all of that vivid experience kind of like in a computer code, insert it into the reader's brain and let the program run so that the reader experiences it not as something they're seeing on a screen, but as something that's happening to them, as something that they lived through. Until we have holodecks, a shout out to my Star Trek fans out there. Until we have holodecks, fiction is basically the most high-tech experience of storytelling that we can offer our readers. So I hope that I've made you feel really good about being writers and not necessarily being nominated for an Oscar this year, but working on your fiction. It's an incredible form. There is a reason, in conclusion, let me say, there's a reason that so many movies are based on novels. There's a reason for it. There's so much depth of storytelling potential in a novel that if it's done well, the work of all of those folks who have to work together to make a movie is a lot easier because a lot of it's been done already. So I'm going to emphasize, sort of going back to what I was saying at the beginning, these are not techniques that we are learning from film. These are the techniques of good storytelling that filmmakers learn from novelists. All of this stuff, you know. However, until you've really been taught and encouraged to focus on them, some of the techniques that I've talked about, using the cinematography of your book intentionally, being really choosy and intentional about what you put in the frame and design it to have the impact that you want to have on the reader in support of your storytelling, using the language almost as a musical score, and feeling your way, not just intellectually, but physically and emotionally into the experience of the characters, just the way a great actor would. This is stuff that you can really work with and challenge yourself to do better. And if you do, it's, you deserve an Oscar, in my opinion. So that's what I came to say today. And I just want to take a quick look because I can see some, here's another interesting comment from Anne. Let me just put this up, Anne, so we can say, here's a comment in response to what I was saying about pacing, using the pacing of the language to create the same kind of pacing. Here's another word that I didn't use, but we use the word editing as writers, right? We edit our drafts, but film editing is how the film is cut is the key here. So Anne says, is it like when I turn the page of the book and see a bunch of white space, right, which you would with lots of dialogue? Exactly. I know it's going to speed up compared to a spread with dense long paragraphs. Very slow. Exactly. So this comparison that you make, Anne, of what it even physically looks like on the page when we've got blocks of unbroken copy versus a page that's got a mix of different lengths of prose. You mentioned dialogue, and I think most of us can relate to the fact that readers love dialogue. If they've slogged through blocks of prose and then they turn a page and there's a conversation, it automatically re-engages us, like, oh, finally, characters talking. This will be a more enjoyable part to read. We have to bear that in mind, right? Because what are we doing? We're designing the reader's experience. And the reader is not going to love the monotony of slogging through the same rhythm, page after page after page. We need to break it up. So that was a great example, Anne, but also it can happen on like large, medium, and small scales. What you just described is kind of a large scale change up of rhythm, but on a more intimate level, you can play with the sounds of words, the lengths of words, the arrangement of the rhythms in the sentences. You can really drill down and have a lot of fun with it. And that's why I reference poetry, because the hallmark of poetry is that every word is chosen for all of these qualities, the auditory quality, the rhythmic quality, the actual sound of the word. It's the relationship of vowels and consonants. Like, what does it sound like? It's the music of the word. It is my take, and this is my opinion, that good fiction is written at the level of poetry. It has intentionality about the language. And I challenge you to start thinking that way. Play with it a little bit. All right, my friends, I'm just, again, great comments here. Wonderful conversation going on in the comments. Experiences that folks are sharing of movies that they've watched, stuff that they've admired in films. Really great to read through the comments and see. But I don't see any particular questions. So I'm going to bid you all farewell. And I hope this talk was of benefit. And if you decide to watch the Academy Awards on Sunday, I imagine that you'll get to see some awards for technical categories. I hope you do, that you may not fully understand unless you're in the business. And I just want you to take a moment to really, in a sense, be a little awestruck of all of the different ways in which storytelling is addressed in a thoughtfully made film. It's not just the script and the actors. It's not just that. It's every element, every visual element, every musical element, every detail, every ashtray on every coffee table that you see. Look in the corners of the frames. See how good filmmakers think about everything that they present to the viewer. It's a great reminder and a humbling one of just how much power we have over our readers' experience, and also how much work it is to create really good fiction. And then go see a movie and go have some fun. I hope you will. Thank you all so much for coming. I do love these Wednesday talks. If you've got something you want me to talk about in a future live stream, just leave it in the comment below. I absolutely love your suggestions. And some of our best talks have come from stuff that you've asked for. All right. In the meantime, happy writing, and I will see you next week.